They say a man in uniform serves and protects. But in Officer Roberto Pearson's beat, the badge didn't serve anybody. Collected. It intimidated. It decided the moment you walked through a door whether you belonged, and if you were black, you never quite did. Everyone in Clover Heights knew the unspoken arithmetic. If you were white and driving a nice car, Pearson waved you through. But if you looked like Victor, you were guilty of something. Pearson just hadn't figured out what yet. When Pearson walked into Rosie's diner that Tuesday morning and spotted a black man in a sharp blue suit sitting quietly at a window booth, he didn't see a decorated federal law enforcement officer with 18 months of evidence on his desk. He didn't see a man who had spent his entire adult life outmaneuvering people exactly like Roberto Pearson. He saw an anomaly, problem, a man who needed to be reminded of his place. He reached for his weapon before he reached for his radio. He thought he was enforcing the law. He had no idea he was standing inside it. The grease at Rosie's diner had been in the same fryer since 2009. You could tell by the smell, warm and deep and permanently baked into every surface, mixing with fresh coffee and the faint sweetness of maple syrup. The diner on Clover Street was not glamorous. The vinyl booth seats had cracked at the seams. The ceiling fan over the counter wobbled slightly on every rotation. The neon sign in the window buzzed on the letter R, the way it always had. None of this bothered the regulars. For them, Rosie's was just home. It was the place where Clover Heights still believed in itself, one cup at a time. Victor Grant sat in booth 7 near the window, his booth. He was 44 years old, with close-cropped hair and the kind of stillness that came not from peace but from discipline. He wore a perfectly pressed pale blue suit, a white dress shirt open at the collar, and a watch his mother had given him the day he was sworn in. A leather portfolio sat open beside his untouched plate. A cup of black coffee steamed in front of him, going cold the way it always did when he was working. He wasn't reading the files. He was watching the room. His eyes moved the way water moves, quietly, constantly, covering everything. He clocked Carmen, the waitress, who refilled his cup without being asked and called him baby, the way she'd been calling him baby since he was 12 years old. He clocked the 4 construction workers in the corner booth, loud and good-natured, arguing about last Sunday's game. He clocked the 2 women 2 booths down, dark jackets, dark coffee, very little conversation, who were not, despite appearances, simply having breakfast. Victor had grown up 4 blocks from this diner. His mother had brought him here every Sunday after church. His younger brother Marcus had worked the counter here at 16, saving for college, before an officer from the 3rd Precinct decided he fit a description and put him in cuffs at that very counter. The charges were fabricated. The witnesses were coached. The precinct closed ranks. Marcus had spent 2 years fighting a conviction for something he never did, and the file was still open, still warm, still the reason Victor Grant had become exactly what he had become. He didn't take this job to forget Marcus. He took it to fix what broke him. So when Pearson entered and took a job hunting for one, the bell above the door had barely stopped ringing. Pearson walked into Rosie's the way he walked into everything, like he owned the air inside it. He was a compact man with a wide jaw and eyes that moved fast and landed hard. 12 years on the force, 41 complaints, 0 sustained findings. He wore his uniform like a second skin and his authority like a first language. He scanned the room with the professional boredom of a man performing a role he no longer had to think about. Then he saw Victor. His jaw shifted, barely, the way a gear catches. He didn't cross to the counter. He didn't order coffee. He walked directly to booth 7, his hand already drifting to his belt, and stood at the edge of Victor's table like a man who had already decided how this was going to go. "Sir." His voice was flat, official. The word was technically neutral. The tone was not. I'm going to need to see some identification. Victor did not look up immediately. He finished the sentence he was reading, set the page down, and looked up at Pearson with an expression that contained nothing threatening and nothing afraid. Just a kind of patient, watchful calm that seemed to confuse Pearson more than hostility would have. "Good morning, officer." Victor's voice was low and measured. "May I ask what this is regarding?" Pearson's eyes moved over the blue suit, the leather portfolio, the watch, the coffee, the whole picture of a man who looked to Pearson's calculus like he was performing a status he hadn't earned. "Routine check," Pearson said. "ID?" Now, Carmen appeared at the edge of the booth, coffee pot in hand, her expression shifting into something careful and watchful. She had lived in Clover Heights her whole life. She knew what this looked like. She also knew this particular man in this particular booth. She stayed where she was. Victor reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, keeping his hands visible. Not because he was afraid, because 18 months of federal surveillance work had taught him that the most powerful thing you could do in the presence of a man losing control was demonstrate, through every movement, that you had never lost yours. He placed his identification on the table. Pearson picked it up. "Read it. Read it again." Something changed in the diner then, not loudly, not all at once, but the way a room shifts when everyone realizes simultaneously that what they thought was a minor scene is actually something else entirely. Carmen had already read the badge over Pearson's shoulder. She set the coffee pot down on the counter. Slowly, without looking away, one of the construction workers stood up. Then another. In the adjacent booth, one of the dark-jacketed women reached up to her collar. The small blue light on her lapel, the one Pearson had clocked as decorative and dismissed, blinked once. Active. Recording. It had been recording since the moment he walked through the door. Pearson's face was changing. The arrogance didn't leave all at once. It drained. The way coffee drains through a cracked mug. Slowly at first, then faster than you expected, and then completely gone. Victor Grant looked up at him. He did not raise his voice. He had never needed to. "Officer Pearson," he said. "My name is Special Agent in Charge Victor Grant. I'd like you to take a breath. And I'd like you to look around this room very carefully before you decide what to do next." Pearson looked around. Every person in Rosie's diner was standing. He had drawn his weapon in a room full of witnesses, 2 federal agents, for rolling cameras, and the man who had been building a federal case against his precinct since before last winter. He thought he had found a problem to solve. He hadn't found anything. He had been found. The bell above the door at Rosie's diner had a particular sound. Not a clean chime but a low, worn clatter, the kind that belonged to a place that had been open long enough to stop trying to impress anyone. Victor Grant heard it every Tuesday morning the same way he heard his own heartbeat. Present, familiar, unremarkable. He had claimed Booth 7 the way people claim things they never thought to question. The corner seat. Window side. Back to the wall. Carmen knew his order before he sat down, and she brought it without ceremony. Black coffee, wheat toast. No plate for the files he always spread across the table like a man laying out the bones of something he intended to finish. She called him baby. She had been calling him baby since the Carter administration, and she was not about to stop now. The diner moved around Victor the way a river moves around a stone. Construction workers in the far corner, loud and comfortable. A teenager nursing hot chocolate and scrolling through her phone. The short order cook singing something unintelligible above the griddle noise. The smell of everything warm. Victor read without reading, his eyes tracking words while his mind turned the case the way you turn a combination lock. Slowly, feeling for the click that meant something was about to open. He had been building this for 18 months. Patient, careful. The kind of careful that costs you sleep and earns you nothing except the right to be certain when the moment finally comes. Then the bell above the door clattered again, and everything that had been warm went still. Marcus Grant had been 16 when he got the job at Rosie's counter. He was the kind of kid who showed up early and stayed late and smiled at customers who didn't smile back. Not because he was naive, but because he had made a private decision that the world's sourness was not going to be his inheritance. He saved his tips in a jar with a rubber band around it. He was going to study architecture. He had the grades for it. He had the hunger for it. He had, by every measure that should have mattered, everything going for him. The officers from the 3rd Precinct arrived on a Thursday evening in October. They said Marcus fit a description. They did not elaborate on which description. They put him in cuffs at the counter while the dinner crowd watched, and they did it with the casual efficiency of men who had done this before and expected to do it again. The charges materialized afterward, the way charges sometimes do when a story needs a shape. A witness came forward who had not been present. Evidence appeared in a report that had not appeared at the scene. The precinct closed ranks with the practiced solidarity of an organization that had long since confused loyalty with impunity. Victor had been 23. He had sat in that courtroom and watched his brother convicted of something that had not happened, and he had felt something shift inside him, not break but reset, like a compass needle finding north after a long interference. He did not join the FBI to forget what happened to Marcus. He joined it to become the thing that could undo it. Pearson didn't walk toward Booth 7 the way a man walks toward a conversation. He walked toward it the way a man walks toward a correction. His jaw was set. His hand was already moving. There was no moment of calculation, no pause to gather information. Just the immediate reflexive certainty of a man who had trained himself, over 12 years, to trust his instincts and had never once audited what those instincts were actually built on. Sir. The word landed like a door closing. I need to see some identification. Victor looked up from his files with the specific calm of a man who had rehearsed nothing because he had anticipated everything. He did not startle. He did not harden. He simply looked at Pearson the way you look at weather, noting it, categorizing it, deciding how to move through it without getting wet. Good morning, officer. His voice was low, steady, the kind of steady that is not performed. Can you tell me what this is about? Pearson's eyes moved across the suit, the portfolio, the watch, the coffee. Something in the inventory seemed to offend him in a way he couldn't have articulated and didn't try to. Routine check, he said. Then, with the particular emphasis of a man who has never had to explain himself, now. Carmen appeared at the edge of the booth. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there with the coffee pot, and her face said everything she was too wise to say out loud. Victor reached into his jacket. Slowly, both hands visible, and Rosie's diner, that warm, cracked, maple and grease cathedral of ordinary Tuesday mornings, went absolutely silent. The two women in the adjacent booth had been there since 7:15. They had ordered eggs and coffee and eaten with the unhurried efficiency of people on a clock that no one else in the room could see. They had not introduced themselves to Victor. They had not acknowledged him beyond the brief, functional nod of colleagues who had already agreed, in a conference room 3 weeks prior, on exactly how this morning was supposed to go. Agent Rivera had positioned herself with the sight line. Agent Cole had the audio. The small device at Rivera's collar had been active since Pearson crossed the threshold. The diner security system, an upgrade quietly arranged 6 weeks earlier through the building's management company, which was, for the purposes of this operation, a federal shell, had been patched into a secure server in a field office 40 minutes away since 8 a.m. Pearson had walked into a room that was, in every material sense, already a courtroom. He had drawn his weapon inside a federal evidence collection operation as though it were his own living room. He had performed his worst impulses on a stage built specifically to record them, with lighting and audio and 3 independent camera angles, and he had done it with the complete, unhesitating confidence of a man who had always been allowed to. That was the part Victor had counted on. Not Pearson's malice. His comfort. Malice could be argued down. Comfort caught itself on camera and stood there grinning. Agent Rivera's finger touched her collar. One small adjustment. Everything live. Everything stored. 18 months of work. Breathing. Carmen did not leave. This was the first thing. She set the coffee pot on the counter behind her and she crossed her arms and she stood at the edge of booth 7 like a woman who had decided, in the space of approximately 4 seconds, exactly which side of history she intended to be on. She had lived in Clover Heights for 51 years. She had watched this neighborhood absorb things it should never have had to absorb, and she had done what people do. She had stayed quiet, stayed working, stayed practical. But there is a version of enough that looks like a woman with a coffee pot not moving, and Carmen had reached it. The construction workers stood up in sequence. Not together, not rehearsed, but like a chain of people each deciding individually that the person next to them had the right idea. Big men, work-worn, unhurried. They didn't advance. They just stood. Presence as statement. The teenager in the corner had her phone out. She'd started recording at the first raised voice. Not because she knew who Victor was, not because she had any plan beyond the instinct of her generation, which understood instinctively that the camera was the only witness the powerful couldn't discredit. Her hands were shaking slightly. She kept recording anyway. 3 other people stood. Then 2 more. Pearson registered none of this at first. He was still looking at the badge in his hand. Still reading it, still arriving slowly at the full meaning of the words in front of him. Behind him, without his knowledge, Rosie's Diner had quietly become a jury. The badge said, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent in Charge. Pearson read it the way you read something that contradicts a story you have been telling yourself for a long time. Slowly, then again, as though the second reading might produce a different result. It did not. Someone at the counter said it first. Not loudly, just a whisper, the kind that carries in a quiet room the way a whisper always carries, finding every ear regardless of direction. The word FBI moved through Rosie's Diner like a current, and the people who heard it straightened, and the people who had already straightened held themselves very still. Pearson's face did the thing that faces do when the architecture of a certainty collapses. Not all at once. First the bravado, that particular forward lean of a man who has never questioned his own authority. It softened. Then the eyes changed. They lost the hard, scanning quality they'd had since he walked in and became something else. Calculating, backward-looking, the frantic internal arithmetic of a man suddenly doing a very different set of sums. He looked at the badge. He looked at Victor. He looked at the room, at Carmen, at the standing men, at the teenager with the phone, and in that inventory of faces he finally saw what had always been there to see. Not a problem he'd wandered into, but a net he had walked into himself, slowly, deliberately, with every step he had taken since the door. The color did not leave his face dramatically. It went the quiet way. The way confidence goes when there is nothing left to prop it up. Victor did not raise his voice. This was deliberate. This had always been deliberate. In 18 months of building this case, in 12 years before that of federal work, in 21 years before that of being a black man in rooms that expected him to either shrink or combust, he had understood that composure was not the absence of feeling. It was the precise deployment of it. It was the decision to be the one person in a volatile room who was not performing. He buttoned his jacket. One button. He retrieved his badge from the table with the same unhurried calm with which he had placed it there. He reached into his interior pocket and removed his phone. He made one call. He said 3 sentences into it. He ended the call and set the phone face down on the table. Then he looked at Roberto Pearson. "My name is Special Agent in Charge Victor Grant," he said. His voice filled the diner without effort, the way a certain kind of authority fills a room, not by being loud, but by being the only thing in it that is entirely sure of itself. "You are currently on camera. This department has been under federal civil rights investigation for 18 months. And everything that happened in this diner this morning has been recorded in its entirety." He paused, not for effect, because what came next deserved its own air. "You're done, Officer Pearson." The word done landed in the room like a period at the end of a very long sentence. The kind of sentence that had been building for years and had finally, at a window booth on a Tuesday morning, reached its last word. Captain Dale Hutchins was at his desk when they came for him. He had been reading a budget report, which struck the two federal agents who entered his office as vaguely appropriate. A man who had spent a decade monetizing other people's suffering, right up to the moment his own accounting came due. He did not resist. He sat very still, in the particular stillness of a man who has understood, all at once and too late, the full architecture of what he had built and what it had finally built around him. Across town, two city council members with financial stakes in the Clover Heights redevelopment project were sharing an early lunch at a restaurant they frequented because the owner knew to keep the private dining room available on Tuesdays. Federal agents were familiar with this habit. They had been familiar with it for several months. The arrests were brief and quiet and conducted with the same level of ceremony the council members had extended to the residents they had spent 3 years displacing, which was none. By noon, the 3rd Precinct was under federal oversight. The announcement was made without drama, in a single-paragraph press release from the U.S. Attorney's Office that contained more devastation per sentence than most indictments contain per page. The department that had buried 41 complaints, that had closed ranks around fabricated evidence and coached witnesses and a brother in handcuffs at a diner counter, that had mistaken its own impunity for permanence, was gone. Not loud, not fighting, just gone, the way things go when the ground they were built on turns out never to have been solid. Marcus Grant's file had never been difficult to find. That was the thing about buried evidence, it didn't disappear. It waited, patient the way truth is patient, in the dark, where someone had put it and hoped it would be forgotten, and where it sat instead for 7 years accumulating the specific gravity of something that has not been resolved. A federal judge signed the order before sundown. The conviction was vacated in language that was formal and procedural and, if you read it knowing what it meant, entirely devastating in its plainness. Marcus Grant, who had spent 2 years incarcerated and 5 years after that carrying a record that had rerouted his life like a road closed with no detour, received a phone call that evening. Victor made it himself. He did not have a prepared speech. He said his brother's name and then he said, "It's done." And Marcus, who had learned over 7 years not to let himself feel too much in the direction of hope, felt it anyway, all at once, the way you feel warmth after cold, not gradually, but as a whole-body event that you had forgotten was possible. The following Tuesday, Victor returned to Rosie's Diner. He arrived at the same time. He sat in booth 7. Carmen brought him black coffee without being asked and called him baby. Same as she always had, same as she always would. He opened his portfolio. The case was closed. The files inside were different now. He read for a while in the good, warm quiet of a room that had always been home. The coffee, for once, did not go cold. Would you have revealed your identity right away? Or would you have waited to trap him like she did? Let me know in the comments below if you enjoyed this story of hard karma and ultimate justice. Please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. We have plenty more tales of revenge, justice, and drama coming your way. Thanks for watching and see you in the next.